After 14 years spent in Formula One and 4 at Red Bull, it looks like the Sergio Perez F1 experience is officially over. On December 18th, 2024, it was announced that Sergio was leaving his seat at Red Bull, being replaced by Liam Lawson, effective immediately. He will not be on the grid in 2025. The 2025 grid is fully set up, which means for the first time since 2010, Sergio Perez, unless some major falling anvils come down, not going to be on the F1 grid for the 2025 season. Now, with that news in mind, lots of fans, myself included, are looking back on Sergio's time in Formula One, realizing what a career he had and what an odd one he had at that. Sergio, in those 14 years, hopped from team to team. He's probably most remembered by most fans, probably for his time in Force India, newer fans for his time at Red Bull, but Sergio had a really wild Formula One career, and it's got me wondering, what is Sergio Perez's legacy in the F1 world going to be, considering all the stuff that's gone down the past year, all the conjecture surrounding his drive, ever since probably it started towards the beginning of June. It's been a while since this rumored exit for Sergio Perez was going to happen, and now that it's come to pass, people are looking at his career in a somewhat reflective mood. I am no different, and so just the other day, I put out a YouTube community post asking all of you what your thoughts were on Sergio Perez's Formula One career, and what were your thoughts on his legacy in the F1 world. Welcome everybody to the Mailbag. This is the very first episode of this show that I've been working on in some form or another for about a year. It took me a little while to find the right vessel to try and deliver this to you, but I'm really happy to finally have the show up and rolling, and I think we've got a really interesting subject to take a look at today. And we're also recording it live. We are not doing anything pre-recorded or anything like that. You're just gonna have to deal with how I usually am on broadcast, so may God have mercy on you viewers' souls. Both all that oh boy, I cannot speak today. It's my birthday, so cut me a little bit of slack here. But with all that conjecture out of the way, let's move into the comments, because we've got some really interesting ones, and we're going to start with this one from Samuel Graham. It says, I think his time at Red Bull has definitely affected his legacy, at least for now. There was so much admittedly valid criticism of his performance at Red Bull that his Sauber and Force India performances were drowned out. Maybe in a couple years' time, he'll be remembered for the king of the midfield days at Force India more than his Red Bull days. Only time will tell. Now, I think, if I'm being brutally honest, that is just about my thoughts on this whole Checo situation. When I got into Formula One back as a youngster in 2014, watching my first ever F1 race in November, I guess it was a 2014 Brazilian Grand Prix. You can all fact check me on whether or not I had that correct month down. But ever since I got into F1 and really sunk my teeth into it, I remember Checo as the king of the midfield drivers, always running in Force India, always punching above his weight, getting podiums. I remember one that he got at Baku back in 2016, back when that race was called the European Grand Prix. It's performances like that that always stood out in my mind for Sergio. But then, as I kind of got a bit more accustomed to the racing world, my thoughts definitely, I'm trying to think of the right word. They definitely got a bit more complex. You know, there are moments like the 2018 Singapore Grand Prix, which, even with all the Red Bull stuff taken into consideration, was probably the lowest point of his career. The crash with his teammate Esteban Ocon, and also a very odd moment with himself and Sergei Sirotkin later on in the race. It was not a good moment for Sergio. But even with those small little doldrum moments, my thoughts on Checo were always, king of the midfield, really wish he got another shot at the big league. People forget that Sergio spent time in McLaren back in 2013, replacing an outgoing Lewis Hamilton, got replaced by Kevin Magnussen, which is a whole nother subject, possibly for a whole different video. But Checo's time in Formula One, for me, is definitely highlighted by his times at Force India. I wasn't around for the Sauber days, however, I was around for those Force India days. I gotta say, I am hoping, for the sake of Sergio's sanity, that his time at Force India, getting that win at the Checkered Grand Prix back in 2020, and even discounting that, the podium performances and the really outstanding moments that he had in the years before then with the team, I am hoping that that's what comes to the foreground in the not-too-distant future. But as he said in that comment, he or she, whoever, or they, always have to cover my bases there, Only time will tell. I think that's a pretty good way of putting it. Because again, we've only had a couple days to sit on this news. Anything can happen over the next few years. And who knows? He may return into Formula One with the Cadillac project. I've been seeing those rumors float about. But anyways, moving on now to the second comment. This is a little bit of a longer one, so I apologize for any flub ups that I have while reading this. Feline Storm, I always have to have that break to catch my breath. Anyways, Feline Storm says his move to Red Bull was an understandable mistake. It was his shot at a top team. Unfortunately, that team is set up to give Max anything and everything he needs for the championship, and the job of the second driver is to be there to score good points and win if anything happens to Max. For whatever reason, that became a struggle in 2024. Exactly what happened between 2023 and 2024, we may never know, be it a battle between Helmut Marko and Christian Horner, a change to the car that didn't suit Perez's style of driving, or simply cracking under too much pressure for the team. It makes me wonder if Liam Lawson will do any better. I'll always remember Perez for the Secure Grand Prix drive from last to first, not his Red Bull mess. Not this Red Bull mess, my apologies. I think that's also a pretty accurate comment as well. You know, the thing with that second Red Bull seat, and we may see it a little bit for Liam Lawson, which is part of the reason why I'm a little bit skeptical about how things are going to go with him. That second Red Bull seat, as long as Max Verstappen is contending for championships and is with that team, the second seat is really just to fulfill an F1 obligation. If it wasn't compulsory for the teams to have 2 entries all season long, I can assure you that Red Bull probably won't even bother having a second car, because if they put all their resources towards Max, chances are they'd probably be doing a little bit better. I mean, they're already putting like 98% of their resources towards Max anyways, but I think that second Red Bull seat is mainly a seat filler, trying to figure out who's going to take command of the team should Max exit at the end of his current contract, which I believe runs out in 2028. Personally, I'm not going to rule that out in the slightest, considering he's going to be a father at the end of 2025. I would not rule it out at all that Max ends up leaving in the not-too-distant future. So who knows? Liam Lawson, if he can hang on, he may have a very good shot to become that brand new face of Red Bull Racing. But Sergio never really suited that. You know, he's older than Max. He was more experienced than Max, which certainly helped him out in that second driver role. But they never brought in Checo thinking that he was going to be the spiritual successor to Max, because I don't have the exact information right up now. I'll actually pull it up real quick and do the quick little math in my head, which, knowing my public school education, probably going to fail me at the worst opportunity. But Sergio, as of me making this video, is 34 years old. He's going to be 38. Actually, I scratched that. He would have been 39 by the end of 2028 when Max's contract runs out. And that's just, I mean, in the world of Formula 1, 39 is quite honestly ancient. I mean, I'm turning 20 today, and I feel like I'm getting up there in racing years. So Sergio at 38, he was never going to become the new guy at Red Bull. Red Bull, as much as they've been tossing junior drivers by the wayside, they really needed to consider the future. And I think that's part of the reason why this move has been made. That's part of the reason why Sergio never really got the support that he did. Hopefully, as I kind of mentioned with that first comment, he's more remembered for his time at Force India and some of the earlier success with Red Bull, and certainly that Sakir Grand Prix victory, even though it technically wasn't last at first. He ended lap 1 in last, though. I am hoping that's going to be remembered, because that really is his crowning achievement in the world of Formula 1. Moving on now to the next comment, a little bit shorter compared to that one. The Tan Juan, hopefully that's the correct pronunciation, says probably about the same as Fisichella at Renault, my apologies, against Alonso. This is a comparison that we're going to be getting two of here, and I'll actually pull up the next comment, which also mentions the same thing, kind of mentioning that he's the brand new Giancarlo Fisichella, great in the midfield, but aside for a couple of extra wins, not much else to say about their top team stints. Sergio, I don't know what it is. I mean, there's certain drivers in the world of racing that do fantastic in the midfield, don't do great whenever they're given a fantastic opportunity. Kind of the same with Sergio. He joined McLaren, as I mentioned earlier on, joined McLaren back in 2013 to replace the outgoing Lewis Hamilton, and that stint with the team really fell flat. He got axed within a year. Kevin Magnussen took his seat, and looking back on all that, it's a little bit odd that they kind of placed a whole bunch of eggs in the Sergio basket despite Kevin Magnussen being in the pipeline. But regardless, I think this Fisichella comparison, I think it's pretty accurate. There's a audio clip that always hankers around the internet, hankers around Twitter, or whatever they want to call it now, where a Renault engineer is basically bleeding Giancarlo Fisichella's ear, being like, hey, you need to be a little bit quicker than that. Renault back in the Alonso era of 2000, I'll say 2003 up until 2006, that team was very much like Red Bull today. It was centered around Alonso, and that second team, that second seat at the team swapped butts all the time. I think Jacques Villeneuve drove for the team at a certain point. Giancarlo Fisichella certainly did. Even Jarno Trulli was with the team before he got axed and replaced by Villeneuve, which replacing Jarno Trulli with a very much so out of prime form Jacques Villeneuve is still a decision that'll boggle my mind. But I think there is very much so a comparison to be made about the situation Sergio's found himself in over the past few years and the situation that Giancarlo Fisichella found not terribly long ago. He eventually found his footing, ended up joining Force India and grabbed a pole position for them at Spa. And I believe the very next race, unless I'm very much mistaken, he ended up replacing the outgoing Luca Badoer, who was replacing the injured Felipe Massa in a very ill-fated two-race stint. But then didn't really do well, and I believe Giancarlo retired from F1 shortly thereafter. So Sergio and Giancarlo Fisichella, very similar. They had opportunities at top teams. They just didn't really make the best of it. I think, honestly, it's like the other way around, though, because Giancarlo Fisichella joining Ferrari in 2009, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Ferrari's 2009 season. It was brutal. At the end of it, they had it felt like a completely different lineup, because, I mean, they had Massa in there, who, after his crash of the Hungarian Grand Prix, was never really the same driver afterward, didn't score a win after that. Kimi Räikkönen essentially got driven into retirement because their year was so bad, off the back of winning the championship 2 years prior and being the reigning Constructors' Championship. 2009 just completely fell flat for the team. So I think there's definitely a comparison to be made between Giancarlo Fisichella's time at Ferrari in 2009 and Sergio Perez's time at McLaren in 2013. So there's definitely a comparison to be drawn there. Thank you to those two comments. Going to move on to comment number 5, and it's from someone who is also very familiar with their favorite driver getting the boot from Red Bull. Sorry, Ian, I just had to do that. In the Motorsports Man, Ian Perez, our old pal here on the channel, says he was fine from 2021 to 2022 and early 2023, but sadly he kind of overstayed his welcome after his lack of performance, which needs to be studied. I think that saying, being overstaying his welcome, is pretty accurate, if we're being real. Looking back on it all, I think the dream scenario would have been Sergio leaves the team at the end of 2023, because at that point in time, his results were already starting to taper off quite dramatically. Do that, and then probably bring in Yuki for this season. Sorry, it's kind of getting choked up there. Quick lesson to any people out there: breathe. That's very important. Make sure you stay alive instead of constantly yapping people's ears off on a YouTube video. But I think the dream scenario would have been to put Yuki in the car, even if it's just for 1 year, letting Liam Lawson kind of train himself up, have that go on, or even just like replacing Sergio halfway through this season, because then you've got this situation where Yuki, that's kind of the other side of things that people are mentioning. The fact that Yuki Tsunoda, understandably so, gonna be pretty pissed off with Red Bull. He's a Honda driver, first and foremost, part of the reason why he joined Red Bull in the first place. That's probably going to be the reason why he ends up at Aston Martin, hopefully replacing Lance Stroll in the not-too-distant future. Actually, funny little point on that. One of my producers for the broadcasting stuff that I do, a Canadian fellow who knows, maybe in the not-too-distant future you'll be hearing from here on the channel. He is just an avid Lance Stroll hater and is pretty much saying, yeah, we need someone in there who's a little bit quicker. But Yuki probably going to end up at Aston Martin when they switch over to Honda power plants in the not-too-distant future. But Yuki, he's definitely going to leave Red Bull, and I can't blame him at all. I think he frankly deserved a shot at the main team, even if it was for a season, even if it was for just half a season. It would be really nice to see what Yuki could have done in that machinery. Who knows? Maybe Red Bull's thinking, hey, we've seen his temper over the years. Probably not a good decision to put a guy like Yuki with a top driver trying to gun for their 5th straight championship. So there's definitely other reasons as to why that's the case. But regardless, I think overall, Sergio's time at Red Bull really started to fall flat like by the midway point of 2023. So I think, Ian, you got spot on there, 2021, 2022, and like the first little bit of 2023, from the start to up until Miami when Max just kicked on the Hyperjets. That was Sergio's peak time at Red Bull. Ever since then, things have just completely fallen flat. So who knows? Hindsight is 2020, but I think Red Bull definitely could have handled this situation a little bit better. Going to move on now to the second to last comment, another short one, and this is pretty simple from Lone Wolf, who says, in reference to Sergio Perez, a fan favorite, but the writing was on the wall. Goes back to the point I mentioned earlier on, talking about how Checo was never seen as that new guy at Red Bull. He was always seen as a little bit of a seat warmer, if that makes sense, waiting for one of Red Bull's newer prospects, i.e. Liam Lawson, to be able to jump into that team in the not-too-distant future. I'm still a little bit skeptical about promoting Lawson this quick because he still has not had a full season to contend with, but Sergio, I mean, he probably has lost a little bit of his fan support as of late because a lot of people have been just driving him through the mud, which I think is a shame, if I'm totally honest. But I think the criticism that the writing was on the wall in terms of Sergio being axed from the team, very much so fair, and I feel like that writing has been there for a significant amount of time at this point. And with that taken care of, we're going to move into the final comment of the day, which comes from Johannes Jose. I deeply apologize. I'm not very good with saying usernames, but I will try my best to read out this comment as best as I possibly can. And I think we've talked about the past with Sergio thus far. Gotta look forward to the future. He'll probably land a hypercar ride somewhere and win Le Mans, completing the second leg of the Triple Crown, making him a prime candidate for an Indy 500 start sometime. Now, I had completely forgotten about this when I first read the comments, but Sergio won the Monaco Grand Prix back in 2022. I don't think anyone remembers that race. I remember the controversy that spawned afterwards when he was like caught partying on a yacht, kissing someone who wasn't his wife. It was some very odd stuff going on, but Sergio has won the Monaco Grand Prix. There was a brief stint the last time Sergio was kind of left in limbo in the Formula One world, where people were thinking that he was maybe going to end up at Arrow McLaren for the 2021 IndyCar season. But Sergio, I think, has a really good shot of finding his way either in IndyCar or the World Endurance Championship. There are going to be some teams, regardless of the performance that he's shown over the past few years, there would be some teams willing to bite each other's arms off for a chance at getting a proven Grand Prix winner and a Formula One veteran into one of their World Endurance Championship cars. Now, whoever that may be remains to be determined. What manufacturer is going to pick him up? Hopefully it doesn't go the way of Kevin Magnussen and end up at BMW, but maybe like Porsche or something like that. Cadillac, that would be really cool. This would be like the dream scenario for Sergio. End up in a Cadillac GTP or hypercar car for the 2025 season, then transition over to the Formula One team as that ball gets rolling. That would be the dream scenario for Sergio. But in terms of drivers who at this very moment have a really good shot of completing that Triple Crown, I think Sergio Perez may be the top guy. He's got that Monaco Grand Prix win. Really, unless you don't... if you have an Indy... You could have the Indy 500 and the 24 Hours of Le Mans win, but if you haven't got a hope of making it into Formula One, that effort's going to fall by the wayside. And Fernando Alonso as well, as much as he's got 2 of the Triple Crown right now, I don't see a chance in hell in which he moves on and does another Indy 500. If he does, I think the earliest would probably be 2026 when Honda completes their deal to turn into the engine supplier for Aston Martin. But even then, Fernando's going to be a little bit up there in the years at that point. I don't think he'll have a really good shot of getting the job done. But in terms of drivers who have a really good chance to get that Motorsports Triple Crown, I think Sergio is probably the prime candidate. So as much as things aren't looking good for Checo at the moment, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. It remains to be determined whether or not that light is a train coming the other way or the end of that tunnel moving off into Never Never Land. Who knows? But for the time being, things are up in the air. Let's wait and see how Sergio's future is going to shape out. But I think that was some pretty good perspective from all of you in this video, and I hope you watching it enjoyed it. And if you want to be a part of one of these mailbag videos whenever the next one may come about, make sure to keep an eye on my YouTube community tab. I'll be posting some stuff on there, and if it's a question about motorsports, chances are it's probably going to end up being the subject of one of these mailbag videos. But for this video, I think that will just about do it. A tick under 20 minutes, coming up to that in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 20 minutes on the dot, 20 on 20. Mentioned it earlier on, today is my birthday, so if anyone wants to wish me a happy birthday, kudos to you, I guess, possibly. I don't really know the best way I can describe it, but with all that taken care of, thank you all for tuning in to the first episode of the Mailbag, and I'll see you all in the not-too-distant future. Take care, and have a great afternoon.